Welcome to Be Undaunted. This is the podcast that helps you lead stronger, elevate your impact, and live with more energy.
I'm George Dom, former Navy fighter pilot, Blue Angels flight leader, and corporate executive.
And I'm Tara Collingwood, performance dietitian to Olympians, CEOs, and everyday people that are just under pressure. If you're ready to grow, to strengthen your leadership, and to reclaim your energy.
If you want to feel more intentional, more capable, and yes, more undaunted, you're in the right place. Good day. Welcome to episode 4 of Be Undaunted. Tara, great to see you.
Oh, I'm so excited as usual. And today we have such an incredible guest that is so important to you. And actually, this is how we met, was through our guest today.
Yep.
And all of the incredible work that he has done in our field. So without further ado, I'm going to let you introduce our special guest today.
Excellent. Yeah, well, in our last episode, you and I talked about the idea of everyone is a leader. First, leading yourself. And in today's exciting day, as we're privileged to have, in my view, the world's leading expert in personal high performance, in developing the skills necessary to be undaunted, to perform at your best, despite the pressures, disruption, and uncertainties of modern life. So, without further ado, joining us today is Dr. Jim Loehr. Let me give you a little background. Dr. Loehr is the retired chairman, CEO, and co-founder of the Human Performance Institute, we'll refer to as HPI, prior to its acquisition by Johnson & Johnson. HPI was literally the pioneer in training programs that successfully leverage the science of energy management to improve the productivity and engagement levels of elite performers across business, sport, medicine, and law enforcement for sustained high performance. Jim is the world-renowned performance psychologist, researcher, and author of 19 books, including Mental Toughness, Leading with Character, and the national bestseller, The Power of Full Engagement. Dr. Loehr holds a master's and doctorate in psychology and is a full member of the American Psychological Association. And I could go on and on and on about all his achievements and accolades and so forth. But I want to share a little background about how Jim and I met. We were introduced by a mutual friend when I was the commanding officer and flight leader of the Navy's Blue Angels Jet Demonstration Squadron. And we gave Jim a behind-the-scenes look at how our organization operated in the air and on the ground. Years later, Jim invited me to attend HPI's 2.5-day executive program to give him feedback. And I was fascinated because everything I had learned about personal high performance in a Navy strike fighter squadron, at Top Gun, and the Blue Angels, Jim had researched the science behind why it worked. So after I left active duty, I became a performance coach for HPI for several years. And that's where, Tara, you and I met and got to work together and enjoyed sharing my experiences and HPI's science to help people from all walks of life learn how they can perform at their very best, despite all the challenges that we all face. So without further ado, good morning, Jim. Welcome.
Well, I'll tell you, it's quite an honor to be present with you, George and Tara. I have to say, two of the most extraordinary people that I've had in my life. And I can say without hesitation that the experiences I had, that you were allowed me to be part of that blues community of pure genius. I tell you, that is the most hair-raising culture. I think I learned more about high performance in that culture than anything that I have ever done. And I've been in some pretty intense situations. But so it was a privilege, and it's a privilege to be part of this Undaunted podcast. And I hope we can create some really important insights and value for all the people who are listening in or watching.
Wonderful. So great to have you with us. And frankly, there's just no way we could cover all the cutting edge work you've done over your career in the time we have today. So we hope you'll come back often in the months ahead Today, though, we're going to narrow our focus to the concept of human energy. And it's funny, over the years, as I've talked about the importance of human energy, some of my friends who think they're really tough guys think I've lived in California too long and have gone soft and new agey on them. So, Jim, how about if we start with you giving our listeners a high-level overview of how you got started in your quest to understand human performance, where it comes from, and why energy is so important?
So, energy is the substrate of all the hard sciences, chemistry, physics, all of the sciences that we hold to be the most reliable. The foundation is energy. Human energy is something we're like fish in water. We don't even think about our energy. We're swimming in it. So we some days we wake up, we have it, and some days we wake up and we don't. But what we try to do in terms of developing a system of training around energy was to try to understand, where does energy come from? What is the source of energy? And all energy comes from the cells of the human body. Every cell except red blood cells have their own energy production plant. It's called the mitochondria. And that it's called the Krebs cycle. That basically energy is produced in the human system from the union of oxygen and glucose in its most simplified form. And that is the energy that fuels everything physically, emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually. And so, in a sense, all of life begins in the first pulse of energy. And when we no longer have energy, our life is over. So the most precious resource we have is our energy, and people don't think about it. We want to learn to manage energy skillfully because that's the one resource that will move everything. Einstein said nothing moves without energy causing it to move. And all of the systems of our body, every single system, requires energy to function properly. So we need a deep dive into that for everyone, because that's how our system works.
And we talk about with our clients and so forth, the idea that life begins with that first pulse of energy and it ends with the last one. And in between, everything we accomplish in life is a function of to what degree can we build and manage and focus our energy. Now, I've heard you talk about how the time management industry has sort of been overhyped, that it's kind of sold us a half-truth, and that energy management is the real performance driver. Could you touch on that for our listeners?
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. There's so many bright people who are involved in the time management industry. We had Stephen M.R. Covey, who was the son of Stephen Covey, which I knew as well. And I would make the accusation that, the time management industry rests on a flawed premise. And they look at me and go, no chance. There's too many smart people. What are you talking about? And I say, okay, well, let me throw this out at you. See how close I am. This is the promise of time management. If you want to have a truly meaningful and successful life, the first thing you have to do is decide what matters most to you. You have to decide, really what is going to make your life worthwhile, your purpose, your values. And then once you decide that, then you have to courageously start investing time in all those issues, all the causes, anything that you care about. And in that investment will come the fulfillment that you're looking for. And I'd say, how close am I, Stephen? And he would go, no, that's pretty close. And I say, that is 100% unequivocally false. Time has no force, has no valence, nothing. Time is simply an opportunity to recruit the one thing that does make a difference, and that is your energy.
Right.
So it's the intersection of energy and time that gives life to time. So if you just have time, you can spend hours with a family member, but you're not investing energy. You get no return. In fact, you might get a reverse return. In sports, I would watch people not having investing a lot of energy, just kind of slapping the balls at the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy. And for hours of work, they actually got worse. You have to be careful where your energy goes. Where your energy goes, you spawn life. So it really is an unfortunate misunderstanding. Time. Energy is the sacred resource that makes everything happen.
Absolutely. I to be a fly on the wall between Jim Loehr and Stephen Covey, George, wouldn't that be amazing?
That would be.
This conversation. Jim, I love that. That's probably one of the biggest concepts that I really learned from you and the work that you've done. And this is this idea of the energy we bring to the time that we have. And I think today, more than any time in history, with all of us being on devices and our attention split, it's more important to think about that than ever because, how many times do you see someone sitting there on their phone and they think they're present with their family or their friends or whoever they are, but they're really not because, again, that energy, their mental energy is now looking at the phone. And even though their physical body is there, what advice do you have for people to kind of be in the present moment and give your energy to what you're doing in this moment, given our addiction to devices?
So it's so interesting. People are very sensitive to drops in energy. When you give energy, you take energy out of your life and you give it to something or someone outside of you and you give life to them. So in a sense, when you invest fully your energy, they kind of know that you care. And that's how people know. You can invest time and not care at all, be somewhere else with your energy. But when you give your energy to something, it really demonstrates that you must care about what's ever happening in this moment. We only have so much energy to spend. We'd love to have a big bank account, but that takes a lot of hard work. If you want to be a big investor, you got to make a lot of deposits that really help you have that resource available. And if you're wasting energy, if you're leaking energy, leaking simply means you're allowing your energy to go into things that don't matter. All they're going to do is waste what resource you have that you could have invested in something that could have produced a real outcome that was aligned with what you really want. So the most important thing is to become aware of where your energy is going at any moment. And if you are with someone, and you have all these devices and everything else that are available to you, be very cautious. If you give that energy to your device, what it does, it takes the energy and the sense of caring away from those around you. So we have to be very diligent, highly aware that the most precious gift we have to give to the world is what we call full engagement, our very best energy in this moment, and that is really hard work with the crazy devices and distractions we have today.
Well, and I think, when we say energy, I'm like physical energy girl, right? I'm nutrition, exercise, sleep, like all those things that give us physical energy. Like when I talk about energy with people, they're like, what do you mean? Like awake? Like, I'm able to do things. And yes, physical energy is important, but what you're talking about is some of that mental, emotional, and even spiritual energy. So that's one of the things that you've really worked on in your career too. So tell us a little bit about when you say energy, what are those components of energy or what makes up energy besides just being awake and having your heart beating?
So it's so interesting that energy in the universe, you look at energy, it has quantity, quality, focus, and intensity. And so does human energy. The quantity of energy comes from the cells of the physical body, the mitochondria. The quality of energy comes from the emotions, and the highest quality energy that's the most efficient comes from the positive emotions, joy, love, kindness, compassion, a lot of those positive emotions, optimism. And then the focus of energy is actually one that, we see with human beings. You can be scattered or you can be fully focused in the moment right here and now. And we really get the most when we're really, really focused in the moment. And then the intensity of energy comes from something we call the spiritual dimension, which is the dimension of purpose and character and values. And so to give your highest, greatest quantity, greatest quality, most precise focus, and greatest intensity is the greatest gift you can give to anyone or anything you care about. And that involves the whole person, not just the physical body, but it involves who we are as a totality. And that's, we're an integrated system, and we really need to understand that from an energy perspective.
Yes, of course. And as you look at senior leaders today, which energy quadrant do they overoccupy, if you will? What does that cost them and their teams?
I would say that based on our experience at the Institute with thousands of executives, the cell that they are most likely habitating is what I would call high negative. They feel a lot of stress. They have a lot of dread. They worry about the outcomes. They have a lot on their shoulders. They're always trying to make sure they make the right decisions. They have problems with their leadership, the press. Their fourth quarter earnings is not looking the way it's supposed to. And it keeps pushing them into that high negative energy cell, which is the worst cell in terms of consumption. You're consuming high intensity energy, and it has a lot of toxicity. So what we say is, if you're going to spend time there, make sure it's critical and get the heck out as soon as you can, and detoxify by getting to either the high positive or low positive cell, in terms of just allowing your chemistry to kind of reset. If you spend too much time in the high negative, you'll end up becoming really, really kind of broken from the inside. You begin to wonder why you're doing this. You start getting a sense of burnout, a sense of, I don't think I can handle this job. Your confidence starts going away. And the joy that you had in really doing that job begins to evaporate. We need to get you to the high positive or low positive side of that equation. And that is how you heal, so that you can go back into those negative quadrants and not risk going to some of these really dark places.
Right. And so just imagining that as you diagram the energy into 4 quadrants, that high negative it's a high level of energy, but the quality of the energy is negative.
100%.
What tips would you have for somebody who is one of those type A high drivers, and you walk in the room and you can tell that the atmosphere is a bit toxic? What advice do you have for leaders on how they can get from, a high negative to either high positive or low positive?
I remember vividly when I watched you, the Blues, and the atmosphere that you created. There's so much fear. I mean, in golf or tennis or any other sport, if you make a serious mistake, no one dies. You just maybe not win that point or win that match. But in your venue, life and death was truly on the line with serious mistakes. And yet you didn't use fear to motivate them and say, if you screw up, we're going to die here. What you did was to try to get them to understand you want them in that high positive energy cell, confident, completely engaged, loving what they're doing, completely connected to the team in a way that gave them support and a belief that they could do this. And every time you brought the clearances in more and more, so that what you did was you created a very special kind of environment for learning and optimism. And it is possible to set a stage in a corporation where fear is the dominant force, where if you don't live up to our standards, you are out. If you don't make your third quarter, revenue projections, you are out of here, baby. So we can get a company, we can get individuals to perform at pretty high levels with fear and in that high negative energy quadrant, but it never lasts. All the joy goes away, and eventually the whole thing collapses. So when I watched you lead, I was so inspired by the way you got there, all of your brilliant pilots into that high positive energy cell, and enable them to really understand the importance of preparation, of ritual, of confidence, and belief in each other and trust. And that's what really, for me, was really the insight in your culture.
that being said, when we talk about this high energy culture all the time, and we talked about how toxic it can be, obviously, to be high negative, but even high positive is exhausting. And I feel like if you're pretending to be high positive all the time, right? I feel like exhaustion is now like a badge of honor for people, for leaders to just be, go, go, go all the time. So how do you shift kind of this culture that equates exhaustion or equates just being on all the time with a good leader?
So that's another great question, Chara. It's a great question. So this is how I put it. I say fully engaged when it matters and disengaged when it doesn't. Even in a session, there are ways that you can do a microburst of recovery where it doesn't really matter. You can take a deep breath. You can let your mind wander a little bit. Even race car drivers and some of these very demanding, just like with the blues. I mean, there is an opportunity for you to reset. And that you can spend too much time in high positive without recovery, and you're going to end up in the high negative or low negative quadrant. We are not infinite reservoirs of energy. We have finite reserves. And so you want to make sure that whatever you're giving your full and best energy to really matters, and that you don't waste it on stuff that doesn't really contribute to what the mission really calls for. And that's always this sense of awareness. I can take a break here. I want my people to take a break. They can't be in the high positive all the time. We need to understand how the system works. It's called an oscillatory system. We are oscillatory beings in an oscillatory universe. And we need to understand that oscillation is energy expenditure balanced by energy recovery. The dominant principle there is homeostasis. The sympathetic system drives expenditure, and the parasympathetic system drives recovery. And if you don't get that right, what you get is an arrhythmia between stress and recovery, which always has consequences and often consequences in performance. So we need to get people very tuned in to how do you oscillate in high stress environments. No matter how tough it is, you still have to oscillate.
Absolutely. And we're actually going to be doing an entire episode on recovery. And, I work with athletes. And so there is a such thing as an off season with athletes. But for our corporate athletes, our executives, our leaders, our, just even everyday people, there's no off season. Maybe you have 2 weeks vacation built into your contract, right? How do you encourage people? Like, what is recovery to you?
So in the early stages of our development of this whole approach to training, and this was particularly in military units like the SEALs or Rangers or FBI anti-terrorist units, there was no priority given to recovery. That's actually what we did. Recovery is for wimps. If you're mentally tough, if you're a tough guy, who needs your... What have you ever gotten back for taking a rest? Nothing. That you get no return for sleeping a lot. All it does is, takes hours away. But when you begin to look at the data of how human beings, the most important window of recovery that has to be really taken care of religiously is the window of sleep. And we need to change what we believe rest and recovery stand for. We have to understand that is as critical to success of a mission as our expenditure of actually giving everything you've got and we tend to think of being a tough person by just, you never give up, you never surrender, giving energy. But there's also the other side to that. You're going to bonk, you're going to lose your ability to execute if you don't pay attention to the recovery side. Recovery is not for wimps. Recovery is for superstars who get the understanding that is how we are designed as a species.
You would hear us saying when I was on active duty, you can sleep when you're dead. And we only said that half jokingly to your comment. The culture was, you got to drive. And of course, as we saw in our first, our episode 2 with Ryan about ultra long distance swimming and his whole his whole pitch was that you can do more than you think you can do.
Yeah.
And so I think that was the gist that we were getting at, was driving ourselves to a little higher performance. I often think of, and Jim, I'd like your comments on this, but, thinking about the 4 dimensions of energy: physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. The key lesson in HPI is that you can train to build your muscle, if you will, in each one of those 4 dimensions. And we get that in the physical dimension. You go to the gym, you work out, and you build your bicep muscle. But similarly, you can train to build your muscle in the other dimensions, if you will. And I view, sometimes you ask, why don't leaders take more recovery if it's so important? And it's oftentimes their attitude is, I just don't have time. I'm too busy. I got too much going on. I really think of it in all 4 dimensions of training. We get it in the physical dimension with regard to physical fitness, right? Physical fitness is defined as, stress, sprinting 100 yards, and then being able to recover to sprint again within, 10, 15, 20 seconds, if you have trained and gotten physically fit. Fitness, in my view, is being able to just shorten the amount of time that it takes to recover. And that was my experience as we continue to train in aviation, was the ability to really focus for some amount of time, and then to be able to quickly get recovery so that you get back in the game. Your thoughts on that, Jim?
So, the very same way you build physical muscle, you expose the muscle to stress, and then you recover, and then you expose a little more energy. And what the stress is, the stimulus for growth, and growth actually takes place during recovery. So that understanding of the physical body applies across all dimensions. So if you want to build emotional muscle, let's say around being more patient, being more humble, being more compassionate, you name the emotional muscle that you want, resilience, whatever. What you have to do is invest energy in that constantly, and anytime you have a moment, either by thinking about it, acting it out, feeling it, what you're doing is you're turning your energy into that dynamic, and that stimulates growth, and the actual growth takes place in the recovery side. And so the very same thing which you just gave reference to in the blues, that you shortened the amount of time, but what you did is you stressed the focusing maybe for just a few seconds, then you went to 10 seconds, then you went for maybe a whole 30 seconds, where now you have the ability to stay completely tuned in adverse conditions, which you call texture in the blues, when you have all kinds of wind and everything else, that now you've actually expanded your ability. When you look at what's happening in sport, this is what's happening over and over again. Their ability to expand their capacity for focus, for emotional control of all the negative emotions, control of their physical body. And then you talk about this dimension of character and the dimension of values. Your sense of character, your commitment to a moral life, your kindness, your sense of fairness, your connection, your treatment of other people. Define what it is you want. Start investing energy, just like you do in the muscle. These are spiritual muscles that grow in the same way all the other muscles grow. If you want to have more integrity, more honesty, more trustworthiness, you have to invest in that and hold yourself accountable, get recovery, and then another dose of stress. And your body says, wait a minute, we need this. You're now communicating to your system, we need more, more integrity, more honesty, dependability, and those muscles will grow. And if you don't invest in them, just like the muscles of your physical body, they all begin to atrophy. So every day you have to make a commitment. What are the muscles that you most need to have the life you want? And make sure you have the energy that is necessary and the focus of that energy to grow those dynamics. And that's the secret to a great life.
Yes. And I think, one of the key insights for me after you and I got together on this, Jim, is this notion, because people go, what do you mean training in the emotional dimension or training in the mental dimension or even the spiritual dimension? That sounds crazy. But in future episodes, we're going to drill down into this and help our listeners understand how they can go about training to achieve the positive emotional energy, the focus and mental energy, which is a real challenge right now with the addiction everybody has to these gadgets. And then, of course, training in the spiritual dimension, which for some people is their faith. But, as you mentioned, Jim, it's really about purpose and mission and values. So I'm looking forward to our future episodes talking about that.
There's a video out that some people may have seen of Djokovic, who is talking about a exercise that Jim actually had him do many, many years ago of what is on your tombstone. So all of this talk about, the word that's coming to my mind is legacy, right? And when you think about what's on your tombstone, and we think about the accolades that we may have had in our life, but that exercise of thinking about, what's going to be on your tombstone? Is it going to say number one in the world? Is it going to say, number one sales, hitting the sales quarter of what, I answered emails right away, like, all these things that we think are so important right now. So Jim, tell us a little bit about, you've done this with probably hundreds, maybe thousands of athletes and business professionals throughout the years, of having them think about their tombstone. Tell us a little bit about some of the interesting remarks you've had by doing that exercise with people.
So it's such an interest. We experimented with so many things at the Institute, and I think it was in the thousands that I actually tried all these different ways of getting people to understand what will make their life really meaningful, and what are the things that they need to focus on to make sure that they have the life they really want when they go to the end of their life. And so developed this notion of a tombstone exercise. And Novak Djokovic was very gracious in his explanation of how this has impacted him personally. But I've never taken anyone really through that completely that hasn't really awakened to a different order of significance of the things in their life. So let's say you've had 4 Olympic gold medals. And what we want to do is we want to know, in the end of your life, what is really going to be the things you want to be remembered for. If you can have 4 or 5 or 6 things that you're going to write in stone on that tombstone, you're going to etch it out. What are those things that are most important to you? And it freaks everyone out because it looks like everyone is cheating from everyone else. No one put gold medals. No one put all that they made $1 million in their first 2 weeks of work, or they became a cajillionaire by such and such an age. What actually happens is they start to put on that tombstone something that connects their life to other people, their treatment of other people, their influence, their kindness, their gratefulness, their integrity. And it's not that chasing is not important to get to the top of the mountain and win a gold medal, but that is not going to be what makes the difference. It's how you did that, how you treated people on your way to the top. What were the rules of engagement that you had in achieving those extraordinary results? And if you really treated people the way you wanted to be treated in your life, it's a great win. You have a deep sense of fulfillment. But I had so many people who achieve the greatest things in life possible and are deeply dissatisfied. And that began to get me to really look at this more closely. I called it the hidden scorecard. The way we treat others is the ultimate scorecard of importance. And that takes us right in to the issue of character, moral, and ethical character.
Well, I think that is a great way to wrap this session. It's gone way too fast, and we've got so much more to talk about, which we will in the future. Tara, what's a takeaway from you for this going forward next week?
Well, Jim has solidified his place as one of my favorite people on the planet. So thank you, Jim, for joining us today. And like George said, hopefully there will be many more. And I think after knowing you and working with you for 18 years, I'm going to write a book of Jim-isms and all the quotes that I've heard from Jim Loehr throughout the years, including recovery is not for wimps.
I'm afraid that won't sell at all.
I will. Recovery is not for wimps. I love that. That's one thing that I heard today that I think is, he said, recovery is not for wimps. It's critical to success of a mission. Another thing that I heard was be disengaged when it doesn't matter. So we want to be fully engaged, but it's not possible to be fully engaged at all times. And so being disengaged. And then the last thing that really stuck with me is what you give your energy to, you give life to, including other people. So the greatest gift you give is to another person, give your energy to another person. So thank you, Jim.
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful thoughts. And, I hope for our listeners who haven't thought about the importance or the notion of energy before, we've introduced that to them, and the key takeaway being that while time management is important, it only gets you in the door. It only, gets you at a place at a certain time. And what really matters is, how do you show up? What kind of energy do you bring? And are you fully engaged in that very important moment, whether it's at work or with your family or whatever? And we're going to drill down into some of this in the weeks ahead. The next episode, we're going to talk about recovery. We're going to talk about how you can train in each of those dimensions in order to raise your game and become more undaunted. But Jim, we'll leave you with the last word. What would you like our listeners to take away from today?
Well, I simply want to say that, to do this podcast with two of my absolute favorite people is a privilege that is indescribable. So this is an honor for me to be part of your podcast, Undaunted. I hope we created value for others. I know both of you so well, and you have hearts that are amazing, and you're both wicked smart. So you put those two together, and it's an unbeatable combination. So thank you for having me, and I hope we can continue this journey of learning together.
Oh, thank you, Jim. You're going to make me cry. All right, friends, that wraps it up for us today. As always, please follow, subscribe for free, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're listening right now. And we would love if you could give us a 5-star rating and maybe give us a few little comments wherever you're listening or watching right now.
And Jim just has a wealth of knowledge. We're going to post his website in the notes. He's got some wonderful episodes there that he goes very clearly describing in much more detail the topics that we touched on today. So I encourage you to check him out. He's the burning bush, if you will. And until next time, be undaunted.